Hello everyone and welcome back to Always Watching. Today I'm continuing my coverage for the Tribeca Film Festival with the documentary The Black Table, directed by Bill Mack and John Antonio James. The documentary follows up with Black students at Yale in the 90s who formed a tight-knit community around a shared dining table. If you want to delve deeper into the documentary, please check out my interview with Bill and John in the description box down below. Although Yale had accepted Black students previously, this was the largest group they had accepted to date. Each former graduate describes being in a state of shock when they received their acceptance letters. Imposter syndrome kicked in. Am I good enough? Will I be good enough? How will I ever be good enough? There was a lot of pressure that came with this. To contextualize their experience, the documentary utilizes a number of clips and interviews from this time to give audiences insight into the different perceptions of affirmative actions, and people were very divided. And underlining this division is the belief that higher educational institutions and the power they afford individuals to not only use the system but change the system to their advantage should be left in the hands of a few. When George Bush says things like, even C students can be president, he's leaving out the part, only if your father was president before you. Even though higher educational institutions can give people a huge opportunity to network and build a life for themselves, there's still a glass ceiling. Like, you could have been Black with a 4.0 GPA at Yale, but you still weren't becoming president over George Raggedy Bush and his C average. This glass ceiling has serious ramifications in terms of, let's just say, who's allowed to rewrite that plagiarized paper, or even safety concerns, whether or not the police are allowed in your dorm. At one point, former students described this incident at a bar where they were accused of being drunk, which was really strange because it was a bar known for people getting drunk. Campus police allowed the bar owner, as well as authorities, into their rooms in order to question them, completely violating their obligation to put their students' safety first. And ideally, you should never feel more safe than you do at college. Like, you're around people that are similar to you and faculty and staff that say they care about you. And ideally, we would love these institutions to be safe spaces built on merit and achievement. But we know now that this is very far from the truth. And the documentary uses this black table, this literal black table that Black students at Yale were able to create, to create bonds and find community, to explore all these different issues. Former students describe how this table was both a safe haven and a political nightmare. And this issue of who sits at the table, who's refusing to sit at the table, really highlights the importance that universities have, not just in terms of like being these academic spaces, but also being very important social spaces as well. I think being at Yale allowed these students to find their authenticity, find out who they really are, and stop justifying their existence in these spaces. And one of the points the documentary makes very well is how, although America is more diverse, it's still incredibly segregated. And universities have been very important in ending that segregation. However, some of their practices have been highly questionable. One common practice a lot of universities use is putting students together from a different race in the same dorm room, and the idea being that they'll get a different experience, walk in each other's shoes. However, how much responsibility do universities and colleges have to socially police their students? Does it really matter who they hang out with, who they want to dorm with? Like, is that really their business? And one of the points I think also this documentary makes very well is like, what is diversity? Is it just what you look like? Is it your class? Is it your GPA? Can we put all the C students together? I think now that affirmative action is over, the question is, what will universities and colleges consider when they're trying to decide who to accept into their institutions and who to reject? I do think colleges need to be regulated in order to ensure that everyone has the same opportunity to success. Like, on one hand, colleges have an enormous responsibility to train students to become the best professionals they can be. However, we can't ignore the fact that there are a lot of money and donors involved in shaping the future workers of America. What they don't tell you about going to college is that it's probably the most important networking opportunity of your life. This is where you're likely to meet your future business partners, your wife, your husband, your future coworkers. Like, these will be your peers for life. Once you graduate from college, it's almost impossible to be exposed to such different groups because we kind of self-segregate according to, our profession, our job. So, even if you wanted to branch out, where would you start? Colleges create this unique space where people are able to coexist despite having very different points of views, coming from totally different places. Like somehow it works. And watching these former students describe their experience at Yale, like yes, on one hand, it was an intellectually stimulating environment, but on the other hand, it was a really important social space for them to find out who they are, what they like, what they dislike. And I don't think the value of higher education has decreased. I think it's just changed. For example, I don't think it really matters if you go to an Ivy or not anymore, just because it's easier to get a higher quality of education now than it was maybe 20 years ago. I also think experience has become more important. People want you to know how to do the job, like prior to graduating. In terms of social mobility, higher educational institutions are still the #1 way to move up from one class to another. Like yes, theoretically, you could learn calculus on YouTube, but this is not ideal. And I think the issue with repealing affirmative action is that it might be a slippery slope because as I said earlier, these institutions do need to be regulated. There definitely is a conversation that needs to be had in terms of the value these institutions are offering. Do certain programs need to be as long as they are? And are students really receiving the type of training that is making them ready for the workplace? Like there seems to be a gap between what employers are asking for and what colleges are providing, and oftentimes students have to supplement their degrees with certificate and courses. So I think my biggest concern with repealing affirmative action is that universities could easily take the stance that, you know what, this is an academic institution, we don't want your opinions here, keep your politics at the door. And that's very dangerous, and we could see that now in what's happening with all the protests all around the college campuses. And one of the points that these former students make is when they first went to Yale, it was very clear that this was an environment that was not for them. And over time, they've had to kind of make space for themselves. And without affirmative action, there would be no black table. And affirmative action by default forced universities and colleges to create a social space that is accommodating for different points of views, different political opinions, different cultures, in order for everyone to coexist peacefully. And so I wonder what the ramifications are of repealing these types of laws. And we're seeing it now. And again, as important as universities and colleges are for training people to become professionals, they're very important social spaces that have dire ramifications outside of those walls. People are losing their degrees. They're being threatened with suspensions just for having a different political point of view. And again, I do think laws are needed to ensure that not only everyone has the same access to success, but students are afforded the same opportunity to create their own black tables or any kind of table or space they seem fit without fear of repercussions or fear of losing their degree or being suspended because people might not agree with what they're discussing or their point of view. So I do think universities and colleges have an obligation to maintain diversity and inclusion, where they have their own way of doing it. Now, whether or not their way of doing it will allow black tables or other spaces from other different groups of people to exist, this is really the question, and so I leave that up to you. You guys let me know what you think, and until next time.